Picture this. It's a cold, star-filled April night in 1912. The North Atlantic is like a sheet of black glass, and the biggest, most luxurious ship ever built is just slicing through that freezing water, full steam ahead, straight into the darkness where a mountain of ice is waiting. We all know the story of the RMS Titanic, right? But what if I told you that the entire disaster, down to the tiniest, most chilling details, had already been written down 14 years earlier? Okay, so we've got to get into this because it's genuinely one of the most mind-bending coincidences in all of history. 14 years, a decade and a half, before the Titanic even hit the water, this obscure little novel basically laid out the entire catastrophe. And we're not talking about some vague Nostradamus-style prophecy here. We're talking about a story that gets the technical specs right. So this all starts with a kind of struggling American writer, a guy named Morgan Robertson. Back in 1898, he puts out this book called Futility. And the plot? Well, it's about a massive British ocean liner, the biggest thing ever built, hailed as unsinkable. And what happens to it? It smashes into an iceberg in the North Atlantic in April and sinks, and a ton of people die because it doesn't have enough lifeboats. And the name he gave his fictional ship? The Titan. Now this is where things go from being a neat little story to something genuinely weird. Look at how the numbers stack up. Robertson's fictional Titan, 800 feet long. The real Titanic, 882 feet. Come on, both had 3 propellers, both carried around 3,000 people. And here's the most important part. Both had a ridiculously fatally low number of lifeboats for the exact same reason: hubris. The creators thought they were basically unsinkable. The level of detail here is it's staggering. And it gets even stranger. The similarities go way beyond just the ship's stats. Both ships set sail in April. Both were in the North Atlantic. But get this. Both struck the iceberg on the starboard side. What are the odds? It's one thing to imagine a ship sinking, but to call the exact side of the impact, that's just eerie. So how in the world did Robertson explain all this? Well, his explanation was almost as weird as the prediction itself. He claimed his stories just came to him. He said he'd go into this trance-like state and that the ideas were fed to him by what he called an astral writing partner. Now, whether you buy that or not, it definitely tells you that even the author felt like the story came from somewhere beyond his own imagination. Okay, let's pump the brakes for a second and put on our skeptic hats. Is there a logical, totally down-to-earth explanation for all of this? Could Robertson have just been a really, really sharp guy who made an incredibly good educated guess? Well, there are actually a few pretty strong arguments for that. So here's the key thing you need to know. Robertson wasn't just some writer dreaming things up in his office. The man was a professional sailor. He spent a solid decade out on the Atlantic. He knew ships inside and out, and back in the 1890s, the race was on to build bigger, better, faster ocean liners. He could have just been looking at the trends and, doing the math, figuring out what the next generation of ships would look like. And the whole lifeboat problem, the fatal flaw that doomed so many people, that wasn't some shocking new idea he came up with. It was actually a hot-button issue in the maritime world at the time. Everyone in the industry knew that the safety rules were way behind the new, giant ships they were building. So Robertson wasn't predicting a secret problem. He was writing about a ticking time bomb that a lot of people already knew existed. And you can keep going down the list. Why set the story in April? Well, that's literally peak season for icebergs drifting down into the shipping lanes. Makes perfect sense. And the name? Titan, Titanic. They both pull from Greek mythology, and it was super common to use those kinds of names to make your ship sound big and powerful. So when you look at each piece by itself, you can find a pretty logical explanation for it. But just when you think you've got it all wrapped up in a nice, neat, logical box, the story takes a hard left turn. Because that rational explanation, it starts to get some serious cracks in it when you look at the details it just can't explain away. This is where it gets really compelling. Okay, so his expertise can explain the general size and the lifeboat problem. Sure, but how does it explain getting the length almost exactly right? How do you logically explain guessing the specific starboard side impact? And most importantly, how do you explain away the fact that this wasn't the only time he did something like this? People who are way smarter than me have actually tried to calculate the odds of all these little details lining up perfectly just by random chance. And the numbers they come up with are so insane, they're basically meaningless.
You get to a point where calling it a coincidence doesn't feel like an explanation anymore. It just feels like a label for a mystery you can't solve.
And honestly, this right here is the real knockout punch to the "it was just a good guess" theory. The Titan story wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a fluke. In 1905, years before it happened, Robertson wrote about a future war with Japan that would be kicked off by a surprise naval attack, 36 years before Pearl Harbor. Then, in 1914, he wrote a story that described submarine warfare right before it became the defining naval tactic of World War I. One prediction, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. But three? That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And just to add one final, absolutely chilling layer to this whole thing, he wasn't the only one. There was this very famous journalist at the time, W.T. Stead, and he wrote two different stories that seemed to foreshadow the Titanic. The first, way back in 1886, was about a ship sinking because of a lifeboat shortage. The second, in 1892, was about a White Star Line ship hitting an iceberg. And the final brutal twist, W.T. Stead was a first-class passenger on the RMS Titanic. He died when the ship went down. So, after all that, what are we left with? Was Morgan Robertson just a brilliant analyst who understood the world so well he could basically map out its future? Was this whole thing just a 1 in a trillion statistical fluke? Or was there something else going on entirely, something that our modern logical minds just can't quite explain? You know, in the end, maybe the real question isn't about psychics or astral partners. Maybe the real mystery isn't how one guy managed to write this story down. Maybe the real mystery is why the entire world had a 14-year warning sitting right there in black and white, a clear-as-day breakdown of a fatal design flaw, and they just ignored it and went ahead and built the unsinkable ship exactly as the tragedy foretold.